Marcus adjusted his sunglasses as he stretched out on a lounge chair by the shimmering pool. The warm sun beamed down, and a gentle breeze carried the soft laughter of children splashing in the water. It was a perfect summer afternoon in the neighborhood Marcus had recently moved into, a peaceful, upscale community with manicured lawns and friendly faces. For Marcus, this pool was more than just a spot to relax. It was a reminder of how far he'd come. He had worked hard to build a successful business from scratch, and buying his dream home in this community was a milestone he'd long dreamed of. As he sipped on a glass of iced tea and flipped through the pages of his favorite book, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. But not everyone shared Marcus's peaceful mood. Across the pool, a woman named Karen sat under an oversized sun hat, her sharp eyes fixed on Marcus. She had been watching him since he arrived, her expression shifting from curiosity to suspicion. Karen prided herself on keeping the neighborhood safe, which, in her mind, often meant questioning anything, or anyone, that didn't fit her expectations. Karen leaned over to her friend, whispering loudly enough for others to hear. "Do you know him?" "I've never seen him here before." Her friend glanced at Marcus and shrugged. "Maybe he's new," she replied, trying to dismiss Karen's growing irritation. But Karen wasn't satisfied. "New or not, something doesn't add up," she muttered, clutching her phone as if preparing to use it. Marcus, unaware of the brewing tension, remained lost in his book. He didn't notice Karen marching toward him until her shadow fell over his lounge chair. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice tight, but masked with politeness. Marcus looked up, surprised but calm. "Yes, can I help you?" Karen smiled thinly. "I don't mean to bother you, but are you a guest here?" "This pool is for residents only." Marcus blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "I am a resident," he replied evenly. Karen's smile vanished, replaced by a skeptical frown. "Oh, I see. Which house do you live in?" Marcus tilted his head, confused by the interrogation. "Number 27. I moved in last month." Karen's eyebrows shot up. "Really? That's interesting because I've lived here for years, and I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're in the right place?" By now, a few neighbors had started to notice the exchange. Some exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to intervene. Marcus stayed calm, though his patience was wearing thin. "Yes, I'm sure. I have my homeowner's ID if you'd like to see it." Karen crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. "I think you should. We've had some issues with people sneaking in, and I just want to make sure everything's in order." Marcus sighed, reaching for his wallet. "All right, if that will clear things up." As Marcus pulled out his ID, Karen's expression remained doubtful. But what happened next would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Marcus handed his ID to Karen, keeping his expression calm despite the growing frustration inside him. Karen snatched it quickly, her sharp eyes scanning the card as if she were a security officer inspecting an intruder. "This is interesting," Karen said slowly, though her tone dripped with doubt. She held the ID up as if expecting it to reveal some hidden flaw. But anyone can make a fake ID these days. Marcus took a deep breath. He had dealt with moments like this before. He knew better than to let anger take over. "It's not fake," he said firmly. "Feel free to call the HOA if you need confirmation. I'm a homeowner here." Karen's frown deepened. She wasn't ready to back down. I think I will. Just wait right here." As Karen walked a few steps away, her phone pressed to her ear, Marcus shook his head in disbelief. He looked around and noticed that several neighbors were now watching. Some pretended not to notice, while others whispered among themselves. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, and it made him uncomfortable, but he stayed seated. A few minutes later, Karen returned, her face tight with determination. "The HOA didn't answer, but I'm still not convinced. I think it's best if you leave until we can sort this out." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Leave? You're asking me to leave the pool that I have every right to use. Why don't you wait until you actually confirm something before jumping to conclusions?" Karen's face turned red, though whether from embarrassment or frustration wasn't clear. "Look, I'm just trying to keep things safe here," she snapped. "You can't blame me for being cautious. We've had some issues in this neighborhood." At that moment, Clara, another neighbor, stepped forward. Clara was a kind, older woman who had lived in the community for years. She had been sitting quietly by the pool, watching the situation unfold. Now she couldn't stay silent any longer. "Karen," Clara said gently but firmly, "I think you're being unfair. Marcus isn't doing anything wrong. He's just relaxing by the pool, like the rest of us." Karen turned to Clara, clearly surprised by the interruption. "I'm just looking out for everyone, Clara. You know how important it is to keep this place safe." Clara folded her arms. "Safe from what? A man sitting quietly by the pool. That doesn't seem like a threat to me." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, Marcus spoke up again. "I appreciate you standing up for me, Clara, but I think Karen's already made up her mind. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to enjoy my afternoon, just like everyone else." Karen hesitated, clearly unsure of what to say next. For the first time, she looked slightly uncertain. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I think I'll call the police to settle this once and for all." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "I have nothing to hide." The pool area fell silent as Karen pulled out her phone. All eyes were on her now, and the tension was thick in the air. The pool area grew quiet as Karen dialed the police. Her fingers moved quickly over the phone, her expression stern and filled with determination. Marcus sat calmly, though inside, he couldn't help but wonder how such a simple afternoon had turned into this. Karen glanced around at the gathered neighbors, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear as she spoke into the phone. "Yes, I'm at the community pool, and there's a man here who refuses to leave. He claims he lives here, but I don't believe him. Could you send someone to check this out?" Marcus watched her, shaking his head slightly. He didn't interrupt, but he felt a mix of disbelief and frustration. He had worked hard to reach a place where he could enjoy moments like this, a peaceful day at the pool in a safe neighborhood. Yet, here he was, being treated like he didn't belong. Clara, who had already spoken up once, stepped closer to Marcus. "You don't have to worry," she said softly. "Everyone here will see the truth soon enough." Marcus smiled faintly at her, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Clara. I just wish this didn't have to happen in the first place." Meanwhile, Karen hung up the phone and turned back to Marcus with a triumphant look. "The police are on their way," she said. "They'll sort this out." Some of the neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. A few whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One man muttered to his wife, "This seems a bit much, doesn't it?" But neither of them stepped forward to intervene. Karen, sensing the growing attention, decided to defend her actions. "I'm only doing this for the good of the community," she announced, her voice firm. "We can't just let anyone walk in here and use our facilities. Rules are rules." Marcus finally stood, his calm demeanor intact, but his voice steady and clear. "I understand the importance of rules, Karen, but there's a difference between following rules and making assumptions about people. I've shown you my ID. I told you I live here. What more do you need?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of sirens in the distance. A ripple of unease passed through the small crowd as everyone turned their attention to the approaching police car. The officers parked and stepped out, walking toward the pool area with professional but curious expressions. Karen hurried to greet them, her voice ringing out. "Officers, thank you for coming. This man is refusing to leave the pool, and I don't believe he has any right to be here." One of the officers, a tall man with a calm presence, raised a hand to stop her. "All right, ma'am, let's take a moment to figure out what's going on." He turned to Marcus. "Sir, can you tell me your side of the story?" Marcus nodded and handed over his ID. "I live here, officer. Karen doesn't believe me, even though I've shown her proof. I'm just trying to enjoy my afternoon." The officer studied the ID and then glanced at Karen. "Did you see this?" Karen folded her arms. "Yes, but how do we know it's real?" The officer looked at Marcus again. "Do you have anything else to confirm your residency?" Marcus pulled out his phone and opened an email from the HOA welcoming him to the neighborhood. "Here's my welcome letter from the HOA," he said, showing it to the officer. The officer examined the email and nodded. "That seems clear enough to me." Karen's expression faltered, but she quickly recovered. "But he could have forged that too." The officer's brow furrowed slightly. "Ma'am, let's be reasonable. We'll check further if needed, but everything he's shown us checks out so far." The tension in the air was thick, but it was clear the officer wasn't convinced by Karen's claims. The officer glanced back at Karen, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Ma'am, if you're not satisfied with the information he's provided, we can make a few more calls. But I think we've already gone through everything necessary." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, Clara stepped forward again. She had been standing quietly off to the side, but now she felt it was time to speak up once more. "Officer," Clara said, her voice steady but kind, "I've lived here for years. Marcus is a resident of this neighborhood. I've seen him at several community events and even working with the HOA on a few projects. He's not some stranger." The officer turned to Clara, his face softening. "Thank you for speaking up, ma'am. We'll take that into account." Karen's face was growing redder by the minute. She wasn't used to people questioning her authority, and she certainly wasn't used to being on the wrong side of the situation. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Marcus, though calm, could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on him. He wasn't angry, but he was tired. Tired of the judgment, tired of defending himself when he had done nothing wrong. He had never asked for trouble, but here it was, unwanted and unnecessary. Turning back to the officer, Marcus spoke firmly but politely. "I understand the need for security, officer, but I've shown you everything you need to know. I have a right to be here, just like any other homeowner." The officer nodded. "You're right. We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to make sure everyone is safe and things are handled properly." Karen's shoulders slumped slightly, but she still refused to admit that she might have been wrong. "But how do we know he isn't lying?" she asked, her voice quieter now. The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, we've already checked the facts. The HOA will confirm everything if you want to double-check, but there's no reason to keep pressing this issue. Marcus is a resident here, and he has every right to use the pool." Clara smiled gently at Marcus, relieved that the situation was finally being diffused. "I'm glad this is getting sorted out," she said, her voice warm. "We don't need this kind of drama in our neighborhood." Karen looked around, noticing the uncomfortable stares from the other neighbors. The crowd had started to disperse, their whispers growing softer as they moved away from the scene. It was clear that many of them were starting to question Karen's actions, and a few even shot Marcus apologetic looks. Finally, Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face twisted in frustration. "I'll let the HOA know about this," she muttered, though she didn't seem to expect a positive outcome. Marcus took a deep breath, his body relaxing for the first time since the confrontation began. "It's all right, Clara," he said with a small smile. "I don't want to make a bigger deal out of this. I'm just glad the situation is being cleared up." The officer gave Marcus one last nod. "Thank you for your patience, sir. And thank you for keeping calm through this. Let's just make sure this doesn't happen again, all right?" "Of course," Marcus replied. "I just want to enjoy my day, like anyone else." As the officers left, the remaining neighbors began to scatter, many exchanging looks of uncertainty. Karen, now clearly defeated, gathered her belongings and hurried away, not sparing a second glance at Marcus. Clara gave Marcus an encouraging pat on the back. "You handled that well," she said, a proud smile on her face. "You've got a lot of class." Marcus chuckled softly. "I try. It's just exhausting dealing with situations like this. Clara nodded sympathetically. I can imagine. But don't let her get to you. You belong here just as much as anyone. Marcus smiled at her, grateful for the support. Thank you, Clara. It means a lot. As the situation settled down, Marcus felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. He watched as Karen hurried away, her face a shade of red he hadn't seen before. The neighbors, who had been watching from a distance, slowly began to return to their poolside spots. The tension that had hung in the air just moments before was now fading, but Marcus knew that things weren't entirely over. Clara, still standing beside him, gave him an encouraging smile. I'm glad that's over, she said, her voice gentle but full of warmth. You handled yourself really well, Marcus. Thanks, Marcus replied, rubbing his eyes. I just don't get it. It's like she saw me and decided right away that I didn't belong. He shook his head. I'm just a guy trying to relax. Clara's expression softened. I know. It's not right. Some people see things through a very narrow lens, but you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. You've done everything the right way. Marcus nodded, grateful for her support. He looked around and saw some of the other neighbors glancing at him, their eyes filled with curiosity. It wasn't uncommon for people to stare when something dramatic happened, but Marcus couldn't help but wonder what they thought about him now. Clara seemed to sense his discomfort. Hey, don't worry about them, she said, her voice reassuring. You don't need to prove anything to anyone here, but if you need anything, I'll be right here. Thanks, Clara. It's just exhausting sometimes. Marcus smiled weakly. I really didn't want this kind of attention. Before Clara could respond, a man named Greg, a neighbor who had been watching the whole scene, approached them. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man who had always seemed friendly enough, though he'd never been very outspoken. Today, however, he didn't seem to be holding back. I just want to say something, Greg said, his voice firm but calm. I've been living here for a while, and I saw what happened earlier. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Marcus. Karen's way out of line, and I don't agree with how she handled things. Marcus raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't expected Greg to speak up, especially not in his defense. I've seen you around, Greg continued. You've been nothing but kind and respectful to everyone here. It's clear to me that Karen was in the wrong. She didn't take the time to get to know you, and that's not fair. Marcus felt a wave of gratitude. He hadn't expected so many people to stand up for him. But hearing Greg speak out made him realize that not everyone shared Karen's narrow view. I really appreciate that, Greg, Marcus said sincerely. It means a lot to me that you're speaking up. Greg smiled. Of course, we should all be looking out for each other. No one should be treated like that, especially not for something as simple as enjoying a day at the pool. Clara nodded in agreement. It's good to know there are still people who care about fairness. Just then, a woman named Rachel, who lived a few houses down, approached the group. She had been quietly watching the whole situation unfold, and now she stepped forward with a smile. Hi, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened earlier, Rachel said. I've lived here for years, and I know that Marcus has always been a positive presence in this community. He's never caused any trouble. It was upsetting to see how things went down. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as more people began to speak out in his defense. The support was overwhelming, and he hadn't expected this many neighbors to stand with him. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't expect any of this, but it's comforting to know that people have my back. Clara smiled warmly. You deserve it, Marcus. Everyone here knows who you really are, and that's all that matters. As more neighbors began to join the conversation, Marcus realized that the situation, though painful, had started to bring out something positive. It had reminded him that there were still people who cared about doing what was right, and that made all the difference. The conversations among the neighbors grew more relaxed, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Even though Karen had left, her actions had left a shadow over the poolside. It wasn't just about her. There was something deeper at play here. Marcus had hoped that by the end of the day, it would all be forgotten, but he knew it wouldn't be that easy. As he sat back down on his lounge chair, Clara stayed close by, her presence a quiet reassurance. She could sense that Marcus was still processing everything that had happened. "Don't let it bother you too much," Clara said, sitting down next to him. "You've got a lot of people here who see you for who you really are. That's what matters." Marcus sighed but smiled faintly. "I know, but I can't help but think about how quickly some people are ready to judge without even knowing you." Clara nodded. "It's hard not to feel that way. People tend to act out of fear or misunderstanding sometimes. It's not always personal, but it can still hurt." Marcus nodded, then looked up as he saw another familiar face approaching. Officer Jackson, the officer who had spoken to him earlier. Jackson had been quiet during the last part of the interaction with Karen, but now he walked over with a calm smile, his eyes focused on Marcus. "Hey, Marcus," Officer Jackson greeted. "Mind if I sit down for a minute?" "Of course, officer," Marcus replied, offering him a seat. He had felt a sense of respect from Jackson during the whole ordeal, and he was curious to hear what the officer had to say now. "I just wanted to follow up," Officer Jackson said, leaning forward slightly. "Karen wasn't exactly being honest with us, you know." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Jackson continued, glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping, "we ran some checks on her background after we left. Turns out she's filed a few complaints before, always against people she doesn't think fit in." He paused. "It's not the first time she's tried to stir up trouble." Marcus's stomach tightened as the officer spoke. He'd had a feeling something wasn't right, but hearing the truth come out made the situation even worse. "You're saying she's done this before?" Marcus asked, trying to process what he was hearing. "Yeah," Officer Jackson said, nodding. "She's been known to make false reports, and it seems like she's had issues with some of the other residents here too. The HOA is aware of her behavior, but it's been hard to prove." Marcus let out a deep breath. "I had a feeling something wasn't adding up. It's one thing to make an honest mistake, but this feels different." Jackson gave him a sympathetic look. "I understand. It's not easy to deal with, but I wanted to make sure you knew the truth. Karen's actions weren't an accident. She's been trying to get attention and create problems where there aren't any." "Thanks for telling me," Marcus said quietly. "It's good to know, but it doesn't change what happened today." "I get it," Jackson replied. "But I also want to tell you that I respect how you handled yourself. Most people would have lost their temper, but you kept your cool. That says a lot about who you are." Marcus smiled, appreciating the officer's words. "I just don't want to make a bigger deal out of it than it already is. I just want to enjoy living here." Jackson nodded, then stood up. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. And if Karen causes any more problems, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll take care of it." As the officer walked away, Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. He still wasn't sure what to make of the whole situation, but at least he knew the truth now. Karen wasn't just misguided. She was someone with a history of stirring up trouble. He turned to Clara, who had been listening intently. "I didn't know any of this," Marcus said quietly. "It's good to know the truth, but it still stings." Clara smiled softly. "Sometimes it takes a little while for the truth to come out, but now that you know, you can move forward. And you've got the support of the people who really matter." Marcus nodded, grateful for her words. "You're right. I won't let this ruin my day or my week." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the pool, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax again. The shadows of the past few hours were starting to fade, and he could finally see the light ahead. The following day, Marcus woke up with a sense of calm that he hadn't felt the day before. The events at the pool were still fresh in his mind, but he was determined not to let them cloud his mood. He knew that Karen's actions had been unfair, But he didn't want to dwell on them any longer. His focus now was on enjoying his life and moving forward. As he sipped his morning coffee on his porch, Marcus noticed a few of his neighbors walking by, all offering friendly waves and smiles. It was nice to see people acknowledging him again, especially after the tension that had surrounded him the day before. He had expected some awkwardness, but instead, he felt an unexpected sense of belonging. Later that afternoon, as Marcus made his way to the pool, he couldn't help but notice that the atmosphere had changed. People were whispering, glancing at each other with knowing looks, and a few even nodded in his direction with a small smile. Marcus wasn't sure what was going on, but he was curious to find out. When he arrived at the pool, he saw Clara sitting by the water, her usual book in hand. As soon as she saw him, she waved him over. "Marcus, you won't believe what's been happening," she said with a grin. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Clara chuckled softly. "Karen's little stunt yesterday has been the talk of the neighborhood. People are sharing the video of what happened, and it's going viral, at least for our little corner of the world." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Viral? You mean people are talking about it?" "Oh, they're talking about it all right," Clara said. "The way she treated you, and how you handled it, is being discussed everywhere. Some of the residents are pretty upset, especially since they didn't realize how much she'd been stirring the pot for years." Marcus felt a bit uncomfortable, but also strangely empowered. He had never intended for this situation to gain attention, but it seemed like the truth was coming to light. As the afternoon went on, more neighbors came by, offering their support and expressing their frustration with Karen's behavior. Greg, the man who had stood up for Marcus the day before, came over with a serious expression on his face. "You won't believe this, Marcus," Greg said, sitting down beside him. "The HOA finally sent out a message about Karen. Apparently, she's been causing trouble in the neighborhood for years, and now they're taking action. She's been officially warned, and if she continues to make false complaints, she could face consequences." Marcus's eyes widened. "So they're actually doing something about it?" Greg nodded. "Yep. People are tired of her causing problems. She's not the type of neighbor anyone wants, and I think the HOA is finally seeing it." Clara chimed in. "A lot of people are posting online now, sharing their own experiences with Karen. It's becoming clear that she's been making things difficult for others too, not just you." As Marcus processed this information, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was relieved that Karen's behavior was being exposed, but on the other, he felt bad for the neighbors who had been caught in the middle of her false claims over the years. Just as he was about to respond, a few more neighbors walked by, giving Marcus approving nods. They all seemed to be aware of the situation, and many were now showing open support. It was clear that the neighborhood had started to rally behind him. Later that evening, Marcus received an unexpected message on his phone. It was from the HOA. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss what had happened and ensure everything was being handled properly. Marcus smiled to himself. It seemed that the wheels of justice were slowly turning, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karen's actions had caused a stir, but in the end, it was her own reputation that was on the line. The support Marcus had received from his neighbors was proof that standing up for what was right always made a difference. The next time Karen tried to cause trouble, it was clear she wouldn't find an easy target in Marcus. The days following the pool incident had been full of surprises. The support Marcus had received from his neighbors continued to grow, and it wasn't just limited to small talks and friendly waves. Many people were actively speaking out against Karen's behavior, and her actions were becoming the main topic of conversation in the community. One afternoon, Marcus was sitting on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when he noticed a familiar face approaching. It was Greg, the neighbor who had stood by him from the beginning. This time, Greg looked a little more serious than usual. "Hey, Marcus," Greg called out as he walked up the driveway. "I've got some good news. The HOA held a meeting this morning about Karen, and it's not looking good for her. Marcus sat up straight, his interest piqued. What do you mean? What happened? Greg smiled. Well, the community came together in full force. People shared their experiences with her, and it turns out she's been causing trouble in other places too, not just with you. The HOA is looking into possible consequences, and it looks like they're serious about taking action this time. That's great to hear, Marcus replied, feeling a sense of justice. I've always believed that when people do the right thing, things get sorted out. Greg nodded. Exactly. The support you've gotten is amazing. People are really rallying behind you. But there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. Marcus raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to the story. What's that? Well, you've been a real inspiration to everyone around here, Marcus, Greg said earnestly. The way you handled the whole situation, staying calm, not letting it get to you, has really made an impact. Some of the neighbors want to show their appreciation. They'd been talking about organizing a small gathering to thank you for keeping your cool and showing so much grace in the face of all that. Marcus was surprised by the offer. A gathering? What for? I didn't do anything special. I just wanted to enjoy my day. Greg chuckled. That's the thing, Marcus. You didn't let the drama turn into a big fight. You showed a lot of maturity, and that made people respect you even more. They want to recognize that. Marcus felt a warmth spread through him. It was touching to know that his actions had made such an impression. I really appreciate that, Greg, but I didn't do it for any recognition. I just wanted things to calm down so we could all move forward. Greg grinned. And that's exactly why people respect you. But sometimes it's good to be recognized for doing the right thing. The neighborhood is coming together in a way I haven't seen before. It's like everyone realized how important it is to stand up for what's right. Marcus thought for a moment. You know, I've been thinking about something lately. This whole experience showed me a lot about people, how quickly things can escalate, but also how quickly they can improve when people choose to support one another. Greg agreed. That's right. And that's why the gathering is going to be more than just about thanking you. It's going to be about celebrating the unity of the community, about showing that when we stand together, we can overcome anything. Marcus smiled. If it helps bring everyone closer, then I'm in. But it shouldn't be just about me. It should be about everyone who helped turn this around. Greg's eyes lit up. Exactly. You're leading by example, Marcus. And that's what this community needed. As the days passed, the small gathering was planned. It wasn't a huge event, just a simple afternoon barbecue by the pool, with neighbors coming together to share food, laughter, and stories. Marcus didn't expect anything grand, but it felt good to be surrounded by people who had shown their true colors in a time of need. The gathering wasn't just a celebration of Marcus. It was a celebration of community. It was about people coming together to show that kindness, understanding, and standing up for what's right could make a difference. As Marcus stood at the grill, flipping burgers and chatting with neighbors, he realized something. It wasn't the attention or the praise that mattered. It was the genuine connection between people, the support that had started in the pool and had now spread throughout the neighborhood. The truth had come to light, and what had begun as a small act of kindness in the face of injustice had turned into something much bigger. Marcus had reminded everyone that sometimes standing up for what's right was all it took to bring people together. The gathering at the pool had been a success. What started as a small idea had turned into something more meaningful than anyone had expected. Neighbors who hadn't spoken much before were now sharing stories, laughing and bonding over the food and drinks. Marcus stood off to the side for a moment, taking it all in. The event wasn't just about him. It was about the way the neighborhood had come together to support one another, to heal after the tension caused by Karen's actions. As the afternoon sun set, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. The people around him weren't just neighbors anymore. They were friends. Greg walked over to him, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "Hey, Marcus, I just wanted to say thank you. This has been a great day, and I can tell it's made a real difference in the community." Marcus smiled as he took the glass. "I didn't expect it to turn into this, but I'm glad it did. It's nice to see people getting along and having fun together." Greg chuckled. "It's amazing how one situation can bring people together, isn't it?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I think sometimes people need a reminder that we're all in this together. No one should feel like they don't belong." As more neighbors joined the conversation, it became clear that Marcus's handling of the situation had made a lasting impact. People were speaking about the power of standing up for what's right, even when things get uncomfortable. The whole neighborhood had rallied behind him, and that sense of unity was contagious. Later that evening, as the last of the guests began to leave, Clara walked up to Marcus. "I'm so proud of how everything turned out. It's been a tough week, but you've really made a difference." Marcus smiled warmly. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone who spoke up, everyone who stood by me, it was them, too. This whole thing is about us, as a community." Clara nodded in agreement. "Exactly. You reminded everyone that kindness and fairness go a long way." As the last of the chairs were put away and the pool area began to empty, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude for all that had happened. The community had proven that despite the difficulties, they could come together when it mattered most. It wasn't about the drama or the misunderstandings. It was about people standing together in the face of adversity and choosing to make things better. As the evening grew darker, Marcus walked back to his house, his mind full of thoughts about the future. He had come to this neighborhood seeking peace, but what he had found was so much more than that. He had found a group of people who were willing to support each other, to lift each other up, and to stand up against wrongdoings. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch, looking out at the quiet street. The events of the past week felt like they had happened in a whirlwind, but now there was a calm. The neighborhood was healing, and he had played a small part in that. It wasn't just about winning a small battle. It was about showing that when people come together, when they put aside differences and stand up for what's right, they can create something beautiful. As Marcus looked at the stars above, he realized that this moment of unity was just the beginning. The ripple effect of what had happened would continue, spreading far beyond that one afternoon by the pool. And Marcus was proud to be part of it. The neighborhood had learned an important lesson. Standing up for each other was the key to creating a place where everyone truly belonged. The end.